The man who never opened his mail. David Keller had a system for dealing with mail. He would walk down the driveway each evening after work, pull open the small metal door at the end of the path, and collect whatever had accumulated since the morning. He would carry the envelopes inside, hold them for a moment over the table near the front door, and set them down in a neat stack. Then he would walk away. He told himself he would get to them later. He always told himself that. At first, it happened because he was tired. He worked long hours as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside of Cincinnati, and by the time he pulled into his garage most evenings, his feet ached and his patience was gone. The mail could wait. The mail was never urgent. The mail was somebody wanting something from him, and he did not have the energy to find out what. Then it happened because he was stressed. Then it became a habit, and habits, left unchecked long enough, become character. One envelope became 10, 10 became 50, 50 became several hundred. He bought a cardboard box to contain the pile and set it in the corner of the garage. Then he bought another box, then a third. The boxes sat against the wall next to his toolbox and his garden equipment, silent and patient, accumulating in the way that avoided things do. He was not an irresponsible man. He paid his mortgage on autopay, had his utilities drafted automatically, and showed up to work every day for 23 years without incident. He was the kind of man his neighbors described as steady, dependable. He was the last person you would expect to have 3 cardboard boxes full of unopened mail sitting in his garage. But fear does not follow logic. It follows patterns. And the pattern had been set years earlier, during a chapter of his life he preferred not to revisit. David had been married once. Her name was Carol, and for 8 years they had built what he thought was a life worth protecting. Then, one March, without much warning and with language that was clearly not her own, she told him it was over. She had been seeing someone at her office for nearly 2 years. She wanted a divorce. She wanted the house. She wanted most of what they had accumulated together, and the lawyers made sure she got it. The legal proceedings lasted 14 months. During that time, David was also laid off when the plant where he had worked for a decade was sold to a private equity firm and restructured into something unrecognizable. He spent 7 months unemployed, which drained what little savings the divorce proceedings had left him. Bills went unpaid during those months. Not out of negligence, but out of impossibility. There was not enough money to pay them all, and so he had to choose which ones to ignore and hope for the best. Collection notices arrived. He opened them, read their increasingly threatening language, and filed them somewhere he would not have to see them again. Later, he opened fewer and fewer of them at all. By the time he got back on his feet with a new job and a modest apartment, the habit had calcified. Mail meant bad news. Mail meant demands. Mail meant someone telling him how badly he had failed and how much it was going to cost to fix it. The new job became a better job, and the apartment became the small house he eventually bought outright in a suburb of Columbus. But the habit traveled with him through every move like an uninvited guest. The mail went on the table, then into the box, then into the garage. He knew it was irrational. He knew it in the way you know you should not touch a bruise and find yourself touching it anyway, just to confirm the pain is still there. At night, lying in bed, his mind would work through the possibilities. Lawsuits, back taxes, liens on the house, debts he had forgotten about, compounding in the dark for years. The more he avoided opening the envelopes, the more his imagination inflated what might be inside them. He had given fear the room to grow, and it had grown accordingly. He did not discuss this with anyone. There was no one to discuss it with, really. He had a few friends from work, a brother in Phoenix he spoke to on holidays, and a neighbor named Gerald who sometimes helped him with yard work. None of them were the kind of men who talked about the particular texture of their anxieties. They talked about football and property taxes and the best place to get a decent sandwich. David preferred it that way. Years passed. He continued to work. He continued to live quietly. He continued to not open his mail. The water heater failed on a Saturday in late October. He heard it before he saw it. a low grinding sound from somewhere behind the drywall in the utility room, followed by the kind of silence that only happens when a machine that has been running continuously for years suddenly stops. When he opened the door, cold water was spreading steadily across the concrete floor, and the unit itself was making a sound like a kettle left on a dead burner. He called a plumber, a man named Bautista who had done work for him before. Bautista arrived within the hour, looked at the heater, pressed a few things, and delivered his assessment with the practiced calm of a man who had delivered it many times before. The unit was beyond repair. A replacement with labor and parts would run close to $3,000. David thanked him and said he would call back to schedule. He stood alone in the utility room for a long moment after Bautista left. $3,000. It was not an astronomical sum, he knew that, but something about the number sent a cold current through him because he realized he had no idea whether he could cover it. He had no idea what was in his accounts. He had been paying for groceries and gas without ever looking at his balance. He had been living in financial darkness so complete that he could not say with confidence whether he had $3,000 or $300. He sat down at his kitchen table and opened his laptop. It took him several minutes to remember the password to his bank account. He tried 4 combinations before the right one surfaced, and when the page finally loaded, he sat very still. The checking account had more money than he expected, significantly more. He refreshed the page and the number did not change. He navigated to his savings account, more there as well. He found his way to the retirement account he had been contributing to automatically for 15 years and opened it with the practiced hesitation of a man lifting a floorboard, unsure what he would find beneath it. The balance was over $200,000. He sat back in his chair. He had worked steadily, spent modestly, and allowed his automatic contributions to accumulate without interference for more than a decade. The quiet machinery of compound interest had been running in the background the entire time he had been lying awake imagining catastrophe. He had been afraid for years of what his financial life looked like, and it had been growing without him. He looked toward the door that led to the garage. He thought about the boxes. For a long time, he simply sat there, the laptop open in front of him, thinking about what else he did not know. The accounts he could see painted one picture, but the boxes painted another. As long as those boxes remained unopened, there was no way to know which picture was real. He went to the garage. He carried the first box into the kitchen and set it on the table. Then the second. Then the third. The table disappeared beneath years of accumulated avoidance. The envelopes were sorted by no discernible order, jumbled together across months and years, the older ones brittle and discolored at the edges. David stood before the pile for a moment, then pulled a chair up to the table, sat down, and reached for the nearest envelope. He opened it. A bank statement from 4 years earlier. Nothing remarkable. He set it aside. He opened the next, a credit card notice informing him that an account had been closed due to inactivity. Balance, 0. He had not even known it was still active. He opened another, a form letter from his insurance company about a policy update. Another from a pharmacy about an expired prescription discount card. Another from the county about a property assessment. He worked steadily through the pile. His hands shook a little at first. Then they did not. Some letters required minor follow-up, addresses to update, a form to resubmit, a small fee that had gone unnoticed. Some contained information that was years out of date and no longer relevant. Many were exactly what he had always assumed mail would never be, routine, procedural, and entirely harmless. He had been more than 2 hours into the process when he found the envelope from Meridian Capital. He almost set it aside. It came from an investment company, and the name registered somewhere in the back of his memory as something from a long time ago, before the divorce, before the layoff, from an earlier version of his life he had spent years trying not to think about. He turned it over. His address was right, but the postmark was recent. He opened it. It was a quarterly statement. He read the account summary. He read the balance at the bottom of the page. Then he read it again. Then a third time, very slowly, as if reading it carefully enough would reveal the error. There was no error. Before his marriage fell apart and took most of his financial life with it, he had opened a small investment account on the advice of a coworker and deposited a few $1,000s. The divorce and the unemployment had erased the account from his memory entirely. He had never thought about it again. For nearly a decade, the account had sat quietly in the dark, untouched, compounding. The balance was $114,000. David set the statement on the table. He picked up his phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the page. A representative answered, confirmed his identity, and confirmed the balance without ceremony, as if six-figure accounts sat uncontacted for nearly a decade every day of the week, which, the representative mentioned gently, they sometimes did. David thanked her and ended the call. He sat at his kitchen table surrounded by the opened wreckage of years of dread and looked at what remained of the pile, less than half of what had been there when he started. He picked up the next envelope. By the time evening came, the pile was gone. He had sorted everything into 4 groups: resolved with no action needed, minor follow-up required, already handled by circumstance, and 1 small folder of items to bring to a professional. The folder was thin. Thinner than he had any right to expect. He gathered the sorted papers, stacked them neatly, and carried the empty boxes out to the recycling bin. That night, he slept without waking. He could not remember the last time that had happened. In the weeks that followed, he replaced the water heater, settled the handful of loose ends he had identified, and made an appointment with a financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who worked out of a modest office in Worthington and who managed, over the course of an hour and a half, to give him a clearer picture of his financial life than he had possessed in nearly a decade. The picture was not perfect. There were inefficiencies, missed opportunities, years of growth that had been left on the table through inaction. But the picture was far better than the one he had been carrying in his imagination. It was strange, he told Patricia near the end of their meeting, how long he had managed to be afraid of something that turned out to be mostly fine. She nodded in the way of someone who had heard this before. Because people come in all the time, she told him, having avoided something for so long that the avoidance itself has become the problem. The thing they were afraid of is usually manageable. The years spent not looking at it are the part that costs them. David thought about that on the drive home. He thought about all the nights he had lain awake constructing disasters from envelopes he had never opened. He had done the work of suffering for years and had never once had to. The problems he imagined were larger, more numerous, and more threatening than the ones that actually existed. He had spent a decade afraid of the truth, and the truth, when it finally arrived, was something he could sit with in a single afternoon and carry to a folder. He was not a man given to dramatic conclusions. He did not call his brother in Phoenix or write anything down in a journal or stand at his window at sunset thinking about the nature of time. He was not that kind of man. But he did begin checking his mail every day, and he opened every envelope the same evening it arrived, and he did not let a single one sit unopened on the table. It was a small change. Most important changes are. Fear, he had learned, does not need locked doors or elaborate hiding places. It only needs darkness and enough time. Give it both, and it will build whatever it wants in the space you have provided. The answers had been sitting in those cardboard boxes the entire time, patient and indifferent, waiting for the moment he was finally willing to know what they said. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please follow the page. We're a new channel trying to reach more listeners like you, and your support truly helps us grow and continue sharing stories